I don't know what's changed as a consequence of that PMQs, but it was a very good performance by Kemi Badenoch, albeit that Ed Davey then reminded us of what should probably be, at least in a moral universe, the single most important element of this hideous saga. And Keir Starmer went from sounding very, very strong. In fact, he was at his best when he was angry, and at his worst when he was required to provide detail. Natasha?
Yeah, and I think that is sadly a bit of a theme of Prime Minister's questions, that Keir Starmer doesn't really answer the questions very fully sometimes when he comes to the dispatch box. But he did answer today at the third time of asking, finally admitting, I think it's for the first time he's admitted this, that he was aware that Mandelson did maintain his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been jailed for child sex offences, but he did come out swinging and insisted that Peter Mandelson had essentially lied about the extent of it. And that is really what is the crux of this debate that we're having today in Westminster and that is happening today in the House of Commons. How much did he know and how much did Peter Mandelson conceal? How much were the security services involved in telling the Prime Minister as much as he needed to know? And what was it that made him so confident anyway that he knew this and he still decided to appoint him as US ambassador anyway? So we will probably get a little bit more out of that, I think, today.
And it's weak sauce, isn't it, really, for the public to... I mean, amazing how quickly the world turns. And it's worth bearing in mind that the White House is full of people who are incredibly close to Jeffrey Epstein, including the president, who was his best friend for a decade. But it's going to be weak sauce to say, well, I knew they were still in touch, but I didn't know how much they were in touch. And that is probably where all roads are leading now. In that, I knew they were friends, but I didn't know they were besties, or whatever it is that occupies that space between no contact whatsoever and contact, but no inkling of how much contact.
And I think the question will be for the Labour MPs whether there is a difference between those two things and what's important to them. Is it that he did know that they were still in touch, which I think, like I say, is in the public domain and was in the public domain at the time of his appointment, or do they believe, as the Prime Minister is saying, that the government have been lied to, that members of his team were lied to? Very strong language. We rarely ever hear the Prime Minister use the word lie in the House of Commons. No. It's just not done. It's not the done thing. Badenoch says that this is quite shocking. It's fair to say the stakes were so high for both of them today at this PMQs. Yes. And they both did very well, I think, actually. I think
Badenoch did better.
Yeah, I mean, Badenoch did well in her questioning. She was pretty forensic, and considering Keir Starmer is usually very good in those forensic lawyer-like situations, this was arguably one of her better ones. But MPs were waiting to see what Keir Starmer said about this. The dust will now settle. Is this enough for them to trust that the Prime Minister did all he could to find out as much as possible about Jeffrey Epstein before he appointed him, or did he overlook some really crucial key details? We might not know that today.
No.
We're not going to know this because these documents, we understand, are not going to be published in full for a while. And Keir Starmer has a bit of a get-out clause there, because you heard him mention we've been in touch with the Met Police today regarding the criminal investigation, and actually that will obviously have an impact on what documents can and can't be published, because, of course, the Prime Minister won't want to prejudice any investigation that's ongoing.
No, and I mean, that, of course, will immediately limit, if an arrest is made or charges are brought, it will immediately limit what we and anybody else can say about anything. But for now, it's a relatively open season. That revelation from the Prime Minister that Mandelson is being removed from the Privy Council, I mean, it is hard to think of a fall from grace, albeit that it's a bit like that line in Hemingway, isn't it, about bankruptcy. How does it happen? First slowly, then quickly.
Yeah,
It's precipitous now. It is as if every last vestige of status is being torn from Peter Mandelson's sweaty grasp.
Yeah, and understandably so. What's obviously interesting politically for us Westminster watchers is how far Morgan McSweeney is also dragged into this. He's the Prime Minister's close aide. There is lots of suggestions in the newspapers that he was personally very involved in the appointment of Lord Mandelson, and what the Tories are trying to seek to publish is all of that information, whether that's documents, whether that's text messages about who was involved, who was as the person that signed it off. You heard Keir Starmer's absolute defence of Morgan McSweeney just then, saying that he was a vital part of helping him get re-elected and vital part of his team. But this, is very politically dangerous for Keir Starmer right now. He knows that there's a powder keg in Westminster just waiting to go off, and this feels like we are very, very close to a moment where his premiership could really be at risk, because Labour MPs are very, very angry about what's happened here.
And it is impossible to get past the fact that he was aware that lines of communication were still open, and everything now is going to hinge upon what was in those lines of communication.
Exactly.
And there may not be room for new ones.
Exactly.
If
Maybe
the levels of anger
won't...
are high enough. Sorry, I talked over.
So no, you're right. Maybe some people won't care about the detail about what was in there. They might just go, well, you did know, and that's enough for me, and I feel a lack of confidence in you. I thought Ed Davey's questioning on the Russia links was very interesting as well.
Yeah, this is one to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, correctly identifying the victims as being people who are still being somewhat overlooked and ignored, but then looking at investigations underway into whether or not Epstein might have been acting on behalf or in cahoots with the Kremlin.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer really swerved that one. Didn't want to get into that at all. Maybe he doesn't know, maybe he hasn't seen those sort of the ins and outs of that. But obviously that will be a huge concern. And actually the Prime Minister saying today that he will publish anything that doesn't, prejudice our national security or anything, that means a lot of it's going to be redacted, doesn't it?
And in Keir Starmer's defence, who seemed very unconvincing at times during that PMQs, in his defence, that might all be true. There might be loads of stuff that should never see the light of day because relations with the White House are always weird, but at this period in history, they are never going to have been weirder. Thinking of speculations, is it beyond all possibility that Donald Trump's people said we want Mandelson in the White House? I mean, this is what they mean, presumably, by delicacy. It was probably the only foot that Kemi Badenoch put wrong, was claiming that it could somehow have damaged US-UK relations when the White House is full of Epstein's mates and Donald Trump was his bestie for years.
Sure, but Keir Starmer, I'm sure, will be very reticent not to impact relationships with an already difficult White House and already that sort of string, the special relationship hanging by a thread in many ways. Keir Starmer will be very clear that he actually spoke to Donald Trump, I think it was 2 nights ago on the phone. There are still differences over the Chagos Islands that were being discussed. If you read between the lines of that call, he will be really, I think, aware that he doesn't want to make anything potentially worse and more embarrassing for President Trump in relation to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And like I said, there will be a lot of stuff that is redacted, and that is a bit of a get-out clause for Keir Starmer, I think, today. And
this ain't going anywhere soon.
Absolutely not.
What have we wait? The next conversation is when the documents are released.
So there are some reports out today. I'm just trying to confirm them with sources in government that the government may release some of it today. But actually, if the Met Police are saying, well, it depends on this investigation, potentially that might not happen. But there was some suggestion that there's quite a lot of documents that are involved in this. And if they release Mandelson's full vetting, that could be pages upon pages of stuff, right, from his entire career, his entire life. And that might take a while to go through. And obviously, they will have to be in touch with Mandelson himself. There's also as well a question about him being stripped of the peerage. Is that still going to happen? Because he may have stepped down from the Lords, but he's still Lord Mandelson. Is Keir Starmer going to press ahead with that?
And I suppose the final part we can identify is the best case scenario, as I can see it at the moment, for the Prime Minister would be that there is some documentary evidence that Peter Mandelson told him. I've been in touch to essentially, which is what Andrew Windsor tried to argue, didn't he? The only reason why I got back in touch was to tell him that I was never going to be back in touch again. Which
obviously has turned out to be completely false.
Yes.
But yes, is there a smoking gun in there? And is there, I think what probably the Prime Minister is hoping on is there is a conversation that he can rely on where potentially the pair had discussions and where he said, are you sure this is everything? Are you sure that my teams know absolutely everything of your past and all of your relationships, etc.? And Mandelson said yes. I think that's what Keir Starmer will be hoping will exonerate him. There is the potential that doesn't exist.
There certainly is.